It was a pointed speech by Prime Minister Modi as he addressed the UNGA with plain speak on terrorism, India's role in the COVID-19 vaccine production and delivery, the current Afghanistan situation, and India's strength as a democracy.
When India grows, the world grows. When India reforms, the world transforms.
A fiery Prime Minister Modi began his speech by highlighting the colossal impact of the COVID-19 pandemic worldwide, following it up with an invitation to vaccine manufacturers around the world.
His Excellency Narendra Modi.
मैं आज दुनिया भर के वैक्सीन मैन्युफैक्चरर्स को भी आमंत्रित करता हूं, come, make vaccine in India.
He also used the world stage to announce another Indian COVID-19 vaccine besides Covaxin that is currently in the pipeline.
एक और mRNA वैक्सीन अपने डेवलपमेंट के आखिरी चरण में है. भारत के वैज्ञानिक कोरोना की एक नेजल वैक्सीन के निर्माण में भी जुटे हैं. हमें इस बात के लिए भी सतर्क रहना होगा.
Clean energy, the dangers of regressive thinking and extremism, and a push for a rule-based world order were key concerns the Prime Minister highlighted in his fourth speech at the UNGA. He also warned against selfish motives in Afghanistan, adding that the war-torn country should not be used to breed terrorism.
ये सुनिश्चित किया जाना बहुत जरूरी है कि अफगानिस्तान की धरती का इस्तेमाल आतंकवाद फैलाने और आतंकी हमलों के लिए न हो. हमें इस बात के लिए भी सतर्क रहना होगा कि वहां की नाजुक स्थितियों का कोई देश अपने स्वार्थ के लिए एक टूल की तरह इस्तेमाल करने की कोशिश न करें.
In his speech, he also made a dig at Pakistan, a day after India gave a strong response to Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, bringing up the Kashmir issue at the UNGA.
जो देश आतंकवाद का पॉलिटिकल टूल के रूप में इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, उन्हें ये समझना होगा कि आतंकवाद उनके लिए भी उतना ही बड़ा खतरा है.
Switching tracks to climate change, Prime Minister Modi asserted that ocean resources should be used and not abused, with a veiled warning that oceans must also be protected from the race of expansion and exclusion. A fiery Prime Minister Narendra Modi also used the global stage, in a sense, to talk about India's development trajectory, claiming that we are moving forward on the path of integrated, equitable development with the principle of leaving no one behind. He also had some advice for the United Nations, which has come under criticism from many countries for not adapting to changing times. He quoted the famous Indian philosopher Chanakya to say that change has to be accommodated within a specified time to stay relevant. Parmeshwar Bava, NDTV.
All right, so Prime Minister Modi's three-day visit to the United States has wound up. It culminated with that address to the UNGA. So for more on the main takeaways from the Prime Minister's address, joining us now is Syed Akbaruddin, Dean of the Kautilya School for Public Policy, formerly India's permanent representative to the United Nations, and now wearing a new hat, that of an author of this new book, The Story of an Unprecedented Diplomatic Win, India Against the US. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador Akbaruddin. Talking about an unprecedented diplomatic win or diplomatic wins, the speeches at the UN General Assembly by Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan and by our Prime Minister, they're a study in contrast, right? So Prime Minister Modi focusing on India's own role on the world stage. Prime Minister Modi making no reference to Pakistan per se, and he spoke about terrorism only in broader terms, but it's very clear, Ambassador, that Pakistan has been targeted.
Well, first of all, Sarah, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to engage with you and through you to your large audience. That said, the UN is a global forum, and people look to highlight issues of global interest there. If there are some who are one-trick ponies, who focus on one area and continuously keep on saying that for decades, nobody listens to them. Prime Minister Modi actually has pressed all the buttons in terms of India and global goals. So, yes, when he talked of terrorism, the allusion is pretty clear. Everybody understands what he means. Leaders need to only signal intent. It's for the next level to take on and speak much more bluntly and forthrightly. That said, look at the other issues that he has focused on. Each of them has a resonance within India. So let's take one by one. Climate change impinges on all of us. Environment is a global concern, including in India. Similarly, look at technologies for development. We have all benefited from these technologies, whether it is inclusive banking or whether it is apps which aggregate data in a coherent manner. Look at other things that he mentioned, that India is ready for health vaccines which they will export.
Yes.
When India did not export as a force measure, look at what happened to the number of people in developing societies who couldn't utilize it. Today, it is said only 3% of the developing world has vaccinated itself fully. Other things were also mentioned. Oceans, it is a tangible threat. Given the pollution of oceans and plastic in oceans, all of us are concerned about it. So if I can quickly summarize and tell you, the speech places India in the context of globalization. It acknowledges that these threats are global, transboundary in nature, and India is doing its bit. So if you look at, say, 25 years ago or 40 years ago, the United Nations was about political issues only. It was not. So you would have a conflict situation or a dispute somewhere else. Today, tangible issues which are impacting on ordinary people within India and across the globe are being addressed. And therefore, that's the difference in our approach to global issues today compared to what Pakistan's approach is.
And talking about being a global player, the Prime Minister also gave an open invite to manufacturers across the world saying, come and make vaccines in India. Also announcing proudly that we have manufactured the first DNA vaccine that can be administered to those above the age of 12. But Ambassador, has this glow been marred by this controversy over the weekend over the UK refusing to acknowledge India's vaccine certification?
So, you see, sometimes countries operate at different level, not understanding the implications. And this is a clear case of the UK, where it is accepting certificates in writing from several countries who have been put not into the green channel. Yet in the amber list that India figures, there are questions being asked on an app. My understanding now is, following the uproar that many have raised in India, there is a reconsideration underway. The UK has very good diplomats. We hope that they understand how India has perceived it, and we hope there should be a solution, because it makes no sense the way that the UK has operated. Also, it's a public communications disaster for them. States need to be accommodative when adjusting. And if UK wants to be a global Britain, then it needs to prove itself that it is following unbiased practices. This does not seem to indicate that. We hope better sense will prevail and we will have a solution in the not too distant future.
Well, but the timing of that still could could not have been worse, but that's where diplomacy comes in. Lastly, Ambassador, though, to you, you've been India's permanent representative to the UN and at the helm of India's fight for a seat at the high table, the UNSC. Today, also in his speech, at a time when the Quad is actually gaining ascendance, the Prime Minister reminding the UN in no uncertain terms of the need for reform and to keep up with the times?
Yes. The reform of the Security Council is an aspirational goal of India, and we need countries with big hopes, big aspirations, need to highlight their aspirations. Reform is a difficult task, not because of India, because there are complex other issues regarding the veto, regarding Africa, etc., etc. But what we've done is we've worked diplomatic channels in concentrated circles. One is at a bilateral level, the next at a plurilateral level through the Quad, and the third is multilateral level, because we have to be inclusive. We cannot work only in small groups. Small groups are important. They are coalitions of the willing, but they need legitimacy in broader groups. And we've done the right thing here, moving from the bilateral to the plurilateral to the multilateral.
So covering all three bases on this trip over 3 days. Thank you, Ambassador, for your time, for joining us tonight on Left, Right and Centre.
Thank you, Sarah.
Well, also monitoring this speech, the PM's address to the UNGA ambassador was Ambassador Navdeep Suri, Distinguished Fellow and Director of the Centre for New Economic Diplomacy at the ORF, also former diplomat. We have Sriram Lakshman joining us, US correspondent of The Hindu, who was covering this entire visit. And we also have Catherine B. Hada, former senior diplomat who has most recently served as US Consul General in Hyderabad and an adjunct fellow of the Vadvani Chair in US-India Policy Studies. Ambassador Suri, to you first. Many mentions by the Prime Minister about India as a democracy. Now, this comes on a trip where he met for the first time face-to-face with the new administration in the US, that is President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, who both in their public comments talked about the importance of democracy in both these countries in the presence of Prime Minister Modi. Are these related, you think?
Well, speeches are usually written well in advance, but it's not unusual for the Prime Minister to speak about India as a vibrant democracy. Vice President Kamala Harris's position on issues related to democracy is well known. I think she's articulated this over the years, over the months. So it came as no surprise to me that she brought it up. I thought she did it very gently, very elegantly, and we should take it in our stride.
Catherine Hada, you know, I think it was the Los Angeles Times reported in its headline today, their wording was Kamala Harris presses India's Modi gently on human rights in this historic meeting. How do you see this, and how has this been covered in the US?
You know, I have to be honest with you, I did not see that article, and the papers I read today didn't really mention it. So I don't know that it got very wide.
Well, that answers the question, how has this been covered in the US?
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for having me on the program. You know, what I did see a lot of coverage of is basically the successful visit of the Prime Minister, the successful Quad meeting. That got a lot of attention. And I think it really speaks to India's role on the world stage. I want to give a nod to India's temporary chairing of the UN Security Council in August. Certainly they play, India played to its own strengths, maritime security, counterterrorism, peacekeeping, all things that India is famous for, but to just get it on the agenda and to get a positive discussion going. And then also the role that India played unexpectedly, getting through the first post-Taliban resolution on Afghanistan, all speak to, I think, the point about why we are in a new world order. I was pleased to see our president did reiterate U.S. support for a permanent seat for India on the UN Security Council. I think it's time to stop winning World War II, which is basically how, the Security Council was set up, even though I take the former ambassador's point, it's a very complicated process.
Sure. Catherine, the other one takeaway or, the soundbite from this speech, which was filled with them, was Prime Minister Modi saying that the COVID pandemic has taught the world that the global economy should be more diversified. Is that, the Prime Minister telling the world that India is willing to position itself as a friendly alternative to fill the gap when it comes to business that China is now being harder on? It's an opportunity to get the US to make things in India and not China?
Yeah, ultimately, businesses will decide that based on what makes the business case. And, I'm pleased to see investment in India is really increasing, but we don't coerce our businesses where to invest. It was good to see in the Quad, for example, there a lot of contact groups being set up that include industry, because a lot of these issues that were raised in the Quad, artificial intelligence, advanced technology, you can't do them. First of all, we can't do them quadrilaterally, which is why it's also good that the Quad is an outward-looking, flexible arrangement.
Sure.
But we can't do it without business. So I do think he set a positive signal. I think, it's happening. I think there's some hiccups along the way. But I believe very much in the potential of the U.S.-India economic relationship.
Some hiccups along the way. Ambassador, do you think India is sending out the right signals?
Absolutely. I think, not only are we sending out the right signals, but also when we don't send a signal, for example, we did not react to the whole furor about AUKUS, is also a signal in itself that, we know that it is in our interest that the Americans are focused on the Indo-Pacific, that they look at China as a strategic threat. But we don't have to speak about it officially or formally. We empathize with the French and we hear their anguish about it. But at the same time, if our concern was that a Biden administration may be looking away from our immediate concerns, that is not the case.
All right. And Sriram Lakshman, after Howdy Trump, it was Howdy Biden. You were there behind the scenes covering the events of the last 3 days. According to you, what was the main takeaway from the address to the UNGA?
With respect to I didn't follow Mr. Modi to New York, and I am in DC, but I had a chance to listen to the speech. And I think there's a thread of continuity between what he said in Washington and also what he said at the UN, basically, making a pointed reference, albeit a veiled one, to Pakistan and not having Afghanistan used as a base for terrorism, also inviting the world to make vaccines in India and so forth. There was also some talk about democratic values, and we saw that coming up multiple times in discussions with Vice President Harris as well as President Biden, as well as, again, a third time in a fact sheet that the U.S. released after the Modi-Biden bilateral. And the Indian response has been, we had a briefing with Foreign Secretary Shringla yesterday here in Washington, and the response has been, yes, well, that's we have received those comments as a reaffirmation that both our countries share the same ideals. My own sense is that those comments were made with a slightly different intent when they were made by Vice President Harris and President Biden in the Oval Office yesterday. What was that different intent? Well, I haven't read the LA Times article that you alluded to earlier. I had not had time to look at the American press coverage of the visit, but I think that headline pretty much summed it up accurately. It was more of a gentle reminder and a gentle nudge rather than a blind acceptance of, what's become a cliche, world's oldest and world's largest democracies. And that's not to say that there are certainly many similarities between the United States and India, and there are significant successes of this trip. The fact that it occurred at all during COVID is a success to as far as I see it, and there have been quite a few deliverables, especially in the Quad meeting on technology. I saw on Thursday and Friday a common theme was also technology, including with regard to Mr. Modi's meetings on Thursday morning with industry heads. They want to clean up supply chains. They want to free supply chains of resilience on China, and these are all significant moves with regard to keeping the Indo-Pacific more free and open. That's not just a phrase. This is where the rubber hits the road, if you will. And I think there are actually quite a few deliverables, especially in the Quad meetings, more so than in the US-India meetings, where I think there are still some gaps on trade. And Sarah, ultimately politics is local, and there's a lot going on in the U.S. as well with infrastructure, and Biden has pressures from the progressives, from the centrists, from the Republicans. Those things have to settle a little bit before you can come with a clearer idea of what you want to do in every single sphere. I'm talking specifically about trade to your international trading partners.
Ultimately, politics is local. I think that's key. So, Ambassador Suri, a very successful visit. Last word to you. Would you say, especially given the circumstances, this is a visit of Prime Minister Modi to the United States at a time when we have increasing tensions with Pakistan and China, and the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban has really removed a potential ally out of the picture?
Yeah, I think, Sarah, the visit in a short span of time achieved at least 3 or 4 major things. One is the first face-to-face meeting with President Biden. The second is the first face-to-face summit of the Quad itself, particularly at a time like this, and the reiteration of the Quad of its emphasis on technology, on cybersecurity, on semiconductor making, on 5G, on a lot of things that really matter as we go forward, and will probably work to reduce the Chinese dominance in some of these areas. The third is the Prime Minister's individual meetings with some very select CEOs. Each seemed very purposeful and aimed at a particular objective. And finally, I personally thought that his address at the UNGA today was genuinely statesmanlike, and it hit all the right buttons with the big picture issues on development and on climate change and our concern for the planet, rather than get drawn into the pettiness of some of the stuff that our neighbors said.
All right. I think that sums it up very well. Thank you all for joining us, a part of our coverage of Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States. It has now wound up. He is going to be heading home. But I mean, let me just end with those visuals of the Prime Minister being greeted by Indian Americans who had gathered to shake his hand, to basically just greet him and show their appreciation for Prime Minister Modi in the United States.